Hello, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to the 2021 American Diabetes Association Ask the Expert series. Today's topic is uncovering nutrition myths, what and when to eat, and is there a perfect diet for diabetes? My name is Carla Cox, registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist, and your host for today's program. Our Ask the Expert series is all about answering questions from our listeners, so start getting your questions ready. Once again, our topic today is uncovering nutrition myths. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions of our expert. Type your question into the Q&A box and click send. Click the thumbs up icon to like a question. This will help us identify popular questions to prioritize which ones we answer. If you are on the phone, you will need to join online to ask a question. You can find the link to join at diabetes.org/experts. If you're having any technical difficulties, please use the chat function. Okay, now a little bit about why we're here today. The American Diabetes Association, with sponsorship by Walmart, is focusing in on 4 important topics in diabetes management to help you live well with diabetes. This is the first of the series. As a part of the initiative, the ADA is holding this free educational Q&A and will cover information and tips to help you take charge of your health. The health and safety of all those we serve at the ADA is always our top priority. The CDC has determined that COVID-19 is a serious public health threat. In general, people with diabetes face greater risk of complications when dealing with viral infections, and that is true with COVID-19. We encourage persons with diabetes to get vaccinated, and if you have questions about it, please talk to your healthcare provider. The ADA encourages people with diabetes to follow the guidelines of the CDC and to contact your medical provider if you suspect you are showing any signs or symptoms or have been exposed to COVID-19. For our most up-to-date information, please visit our website at diabetes.org/coronavirus or call 1-800-342-2383. Before we start opening up our Q&A with our expert, we would like to ask you a few questions. Please click on the box that best answers the questions, and you will see the total results on your screen. Number 1, true or false? There is a perfect food plan for persons with diabetes. True, false, or not sure? Question number 2. How much of your plate should you fill with non-starchy vegetables? A quarter of your plate, half your plate, or your whole plate? Question number 3. Generally, how confident are you in your ability to manage your diabetes? Use a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 not at all confident, 5 very confident, and 3 kind of in the middle, or not applicable. And our final question, do you regularly meet with your healthcare team to help you manage your diabetes? Yes, no, or not applicable? Thank you for answering those questions. And now I am happy to introduce our guest for today's event, Hope Warshaw. Hope has been a registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist for over 40 years. For much of her career, she has owned a consultancy, Hope Warshaw Associates, now based in Asheville, North Carolina, in which she applies her years of experience in her work as a consultant, book author, freelance writer, and diabetes care and education specialist. Hope is perhaps the best known for several best-selling books she has written and revised for ADA, including Diabetes Meal Planning Made Easy and Eat Out, Eat Well, How to Eat Healthy in Any Restaurant. Hope has been an active and tireless volunteer with several diabetes-related organizations, including ADA, the Association of Diabetes Care and Education Specialists, and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And I will add that I have known Hope for quite some time, and she is an absolute delight. We're so happy to have her. So Hope, welcome, and why don't you go ahead and tell us a little more about yourself?
Hi, Carla. I am happy to be here with you today, and I really look forward to answering lots of questions from people who send them in. So as Carla mentioned, I have been around diabetes and diabetes care for over 40 years as a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes care and education specialist, which may be a new term to some people. I think we should make that point. This was a name change back about a year or so ago from certified diabetes educator. So I have to say I'm passionate about helping people with diabetes and their loved ones get accurate research-based information about diabetes and particularly about diabetes nutrition management, along with practical tips and tactics to put healthy eating and nutrition practices into daily healthy eating. While I don't have diabetes, and I'll just say that up front because I think it's important to do so, I practice a lot of the tips I would likely share as I attempt to eat healthfully. And I do believe we all need that little bit of wiggle room for the goodies that we all enjoy eating.
Thank you, Hope. I certainly agree with that. As we are waiting for our questions to begin rolling in, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with the first question. There are so many food plans out there for persons with diabetes on the internet, different consultants, whatever. Is there really a perfect plan for everyone with diabetes?
So in our discussion today, I'm going to use the term eating plans or eating patterns. Really, eating patterns is the term used in the most recent ADA nutrition guidance or consensus report last published in 2019. But to answer your question, no, there is no one perfect eating plan for people with diabetes or one way that people with diabetes must eat to manage their diabetes day by day and over time. So since changing one's eating habits is tough work, and we all know we get a lot of questions on this topic, I encourage people to start by carefully assessing their current food choices and eating habits, because those are close to your heart and they need to be considered as you start to make some changes. So with this really honest assessment in hand, I encourage people to not try to make big wholesale changes, but to make tweaks. And I'll offer a couple of examples here. So since today we're focusing on fruits and vegetables, and we know that most people don't eat enough of them, let's focus our examples on them. So by tweaking, I mean, if you do your honest assessment and you determine that you at best eat one serving of fruit each day, set a realistic, what we call SMART goal to eat more fruit. Perhaps it's something like, I will eat fruit at least 4 days each week over the next 2 weeks. I will eat a serving of fruit with my lunch and as an afternoon snack. Another example, if you don't eat enough raw vegetables, perhaps your tweak or SMART goal is, at least 4 days a week, I will eat a handful of baby carrots, cherry tomatoes, or sliced cucumbers. So easy peasy with lunch and dinner. So it's these types of goals that make taking steps towards healthy eating a bit easier.
Great. Thanks, Hope. So one question coming in from Vanessa, can I eat fruit and how much is too much?
So yes, people with diabetes can eat fruit. I would encourage, again, we're sort of talking about, fresh or canned or frozen. So regarding fruit, sure, fresh, but there certainly is also canned fruit with no sugar added. And there's a good bit of that available today. And there's also frozen fruit that is packed with no additional sugar. And so when it comes to the canned and the frozen that I mentioned, those are good things to keep around. So, if you don't have the fresh, you can take advantage of always having something either canned or frozen. And did I answer that completely, or was there another part?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay.
So now we have an anonymous attendee who is obviously knows you. So, hi, Hope. In the past, you've vehemently against low carb diets, even saying steer clear of low carb mania in an article. Have you changed your opinion on carbs since then, especially with evidence continuing to show its safety and efficacy, like the 2018 Harvard study? And of course, so many diabetics are doing so as well.
So I think one needs to be, again, very focused on the research and what the research shows. I know the study that this person is referring to, or at least I think is referring to, from the GRIT community. That was not any way, shape, or form a randomized controlled study. People need to find their way and find what works for them. To be honest, I feel like my biggest concern, and let's sort of differentiate between, let's not try to put in one bucket all lower carbohydrate consumption and very low or practically no carbohydrate. They are really very, very different things. And I will use as my research benchmark the recommendations that come in the ADA nutrition guidance. And I think there's some good consensus for, particularly for people with type 2 diabetes, on the benefits of consuming a lower consumption of healthier sources of carbohydrate. And so by that, I mean somewhere in the 40%, 35%, 40% of calories from healthier sources of carbohydrate.
I think this is an excellent question coming from Dave, and one I think could be clarified. What makes carbohydrate essential in the human diet? And I think to expand on that, what are the nutrients we find in some of the carbohydrate-rich foods that we're often so afraid to eat? What are the nutrients that we'd be missing if we didn't eat them?
I think so there's definitely some vitamins and minerals. Vitamin C for one. And I think one of the things I think of a lot is, if you're not eating some fruits and vegetables and whole grains, you are not getting sufficient dietary fiber. And that's a concern for me today, and particularly with some more attention on maintaining a healthy gut microbiome. It's dietary fibers that, and some, particularly your short chain fatty acids, and not to go too deep here, that turn on making something that's called butyrate, which really helps in the end in terms of glycemic management.
Great, thank you. I think this is a really good question too, completely off the subject of carbs, actually. This comes from Jordan. Do you recommend intermittent fasting to anyone with type 2 diabetes control blood glucose? If so, are people typically adherent to this protocol? And if you do not, what are some of the reasons that you don't approve of it?
So my vantage point in nutrition recommendations and nutrition advice is very much around not tomorrow and the next day, but what are the habits that people can tweak, as I mentioned before, and maintain over the long haul, living their life. We know type 2 diabetes is a progressive disease. And I am, totally on board with, early at diagnosis or in pre-diabetes with some weight loss. I believe that, yes, people can get some potential reversal, but it really depends on what your beta cell reserve, what your capacity to make insulin is at that point in time. And that's what those studies show. But over time, people continue to get older. As we get older, we tend to become glucose intolerant, more glucose intolerant. And, I think sometimes people are so hesitant about taking glucose lowering medications. And yet, Carla, you and I are old enough and have been around diabetes long enough to remember when the only medications for glucose control were insulin, and not nearly as many or as well-developed insulins as there are today. And then the sulfonylureas, the glyburide and glipizide. And now we have so many other medications that people can use. In addition, I'm in no way, shape, or form saying, ignore nutrition. I mean, I'm a dietitian. Obviously, I believe that healthy eating can go a long way, with glucose control. It can go a long way with weight management. It can go a long way with lipid management. But people need to find a comfortable balance in their life where they are doing what they can to eat healthfully, and however one defines that, and managing their glucose levels, maximizing how much their glucose is. Now we're using time in range, but also living the life that they want to live. And as I mentioned in my introduction, having a little bit of that wiggle room. I really like that the ADA nutrition recommendations continue. I forget when this started, whether it was 2008 or 2013, to talk about maintaining the pleasure of eating. And that is a pleasure of life. So people need to find their own balance.
Great. So this comes from Carol, and Carol says, I've just been diagnosed with diabetes and have gone on Whole30 eating, one of the many options, right? At some point, I know that I will go off of it periodically. How quickly would a piece of birthday cake, for example, affect me, and how drastically? And I might add, this will depend on the size of a birthday cake and how much frosting's on it. So we have to consider that as part of it, but it's a good question.
So this is sort of, if you will, the heart of the matter that I am talking about. Is there will always be the next quote unquote best diet. Because there's money to be made on people finding the next magic bullet. But I would really encourage people to try to not take an on and off approach of certain eating plans. I mean, maybe the person who is following Whole30, which I know a little bit about, not thoroughly, finds what parts of that eating plan and food choices and eating habits work well for their life. And what of that can they retain and maintain over time, rather than thinking of it as, I'm on it, I'm off it, I'm on it, I'm off it. I mean, that requires a lot of sort of mental gymnastics, if you will.
So in response to the birthday cake, I mean, when is it going to show up in your glucose? Well, it's probably going to show up in about an hour to an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. So if you were to do a finger poke or look at a continuous glucose monitor and you had a piece of birthday cake, do it. See what happens. But monitor it to see what happens. And maybe instead of having a large piece of birthday cake, you can have a small piece, or you can scrape off the frosting, or, however you want to address your glucose and your food plan.
Yeah. So yeah. And one of the things I would say to that is, in a real sort of mental intuitive eating sort of mindset, is think about how many bites of that birthday cake you really sort of enjoy and savor. Because I think people can really have much smaller amounts of sweets and make every bite really yummy and have much smaller portions.
Yeah. Yeah. Or have it with something that might slow the absorption, like a handful of almonds or
right.
something.
I mean, going back to that birthday cake and glycemic impact, a birthday cake that is way higher in fat is probably going to impact glucose at a slower rate of something that is much heavier in sugar. I think people often think of sweets being high in carbohydrate, but so often, just because fat is a much more concentrated source of calories, sweets, the calories are more contributed by the fats, and sometimes they're not the healthiest of fats.
So here's a question on sugar substitute, so to speak. Is stevia safe as a sugar substitute?
Again, I will point to the ADA nutrition guidance, and the ADA nutrition guidance around all sugar substitutes or low and no calorie sweeteners is that what is approved or reviewed by the FDA and is on the market are safe for people with diabetes. I think this is another area, and Carla, I've done a bunch of writing in this area of sugar substitutes. In fact, I just recorded a podcast that'll be out in a few weeks. And, there's just a lot of sort of media headlines around on this topic. So once again, my recommendation is what is on the market is safe. What has been approved or reviewed by FDA is safe. Are they magic bullets for weight loss? No. Can people with diabetes use them as a way to satisfy that sweet tooth? Have a diet soda. Some people really like that sort of fizzy carbonated versus just, drink more water concept. So people really, find the one that you like best in terms of taste. Find some foods that are sweetened with them that satisfy your sweet tooth. I mean, that to me is really the practical recommendations.
Great. Here's a question coming in from Kathleen. I'm lost on how much starch is a no-no. I get that. I love fruit and vegetables. I eat fresh only. I don't like chickpeas, lima beans, kidney beans, beets. I love popcorn. Have an air popper. Big life changer. What is a good suggestion to get healthy carbs and how much per day? Whoa, that's a good question.
So, I mean, let me tell my sort of funny story that I like on this topic of how much should I eat. So I realize people can only see my shoulders up, but I am 4'10". So, and likely shrinking. But this is a number of years ago. I was doing a talk. I distinctly remember it was in Baltimore, and I had been introduced by an endocrinologist who was about 6'5". And he came up during the Q&A and we got a question like that. how much carbohydrate should people with diabetes eat? And so it was just such a perfect visual, me, 4'10", this 6'5" endocrinologist standing next to me in pretty good shape. And I was like, do you think that he and I need the same amount of even total calories, protein, fat, carbohydrate? I mean, the answer is no. The amount of all nutrients you eat needs to be customized to you and your nutritional needs. And I mean, I certainly think that you and I, as registered dietitians and certified diabetes educators, really want to encourage everyone on the call to seek out the services of us. Seek out the services of our registered dietitian, certified diabetes care and education specialist colleagues. If you have not been to a diabetes self-management education program, I highly recommend that you ask your provider for a referral, and you get there and you take advantage of those services. They are generally speaking covered if you have healthcare, and they're covered by Medicare as well.
Great. If you're just joining us, welcome to today's Ask the Expert Q&A, covering nutrition myths. And as a reminder, to ask a question, please use the Q&A icon and type in your question there, and then it will come to us immediately. Thank you. We're getting lots of good questions. This is a good one. Denise says, do you need to eat a whole grain, which has carbs, if you eat beans for protein, which also have carbs? Also, so two questions. My brother has type 2 diabetes and does not cook. He uses a microwave and eats out. Do you have some good suggestions? And I know you do, Hope. So what are those?
Okay, so the first one is beans. And no, I mean, you don't have to eat whole grains. They certainly are nutrient dense foods and contain some fiber, but beans and peas are excellent sources of dietary fiber. They're filled with some of those soluble fibers, which are very healthy. But beans and peas, absolutely. I mean, the calories they've got protein, but most of the calories are in the source of carbohydrate, and yet they contain no fat until you maybe add it. And then was there a second part of that question?
Yes. A brother who has type 2 and doesn't cook, but uses a microwave or eats out. Are there some suggestions?
Right. Well, you can certainly do a lot with a microwave. I think you have to be really careful with prepared foods. I mean, I think the reality is many of us, and I heard this term many years ago, people are much more assembling meals today than we are necessarily cooking them. But there's so many more ready to eat foods. And, I know, like, I buy boxes of lettuce and just, take the pre-washed field greens. And so I'm not doing that. And one of the things I actually do with salad ingredients, because I pretty much eat a sort of entree salad almost every day for lunch, is I pre-cut, like on Sunday afternoon, I'll just take out the carrots and the celery and the red cabbage and red onions, etc. And I cut sort of enough of those things for pretty much about 5 days. And then, so it's the field greens and those things. And a salad is pretty easy to prepare. So you don't have to necessarily cook per se. And there are definitely some healthier packaged foods that people can buy. Restaurant eating, which is, a whole topic on which I wrote a big, thick book with ADA, is, again, It's where are you going to eat? What are you choosing off of a menu? People can absolutely eat healthfully in restaurants. Is it easy? No. Should you be careful about what restaurants you go to? Yes. It's much easier to eat more added sugars and more added fat and not the healthiest fats. And it's way easier to eat a lot of sodium. And that's a concern if you have high blood pressure. But I mean, healthy restaurant eating absolutely can be done. And it's not just yes, it's the foods you choose, but it is also how much of those foods you eat. I mean, so in the Eat Out, Eat Well book that I have with ADA and any of the work I do around restaurant eating, because that's been another topic I have talked about a lot over time, is I talk about portion control strategies, and I'm known as the portion control queen in my house. It's, you know, it's the splitting and the sharing, it's the working with the appetizers, and you know, we've already covered dessert a little bit of, you know, splitting and sharing a dessert. Oftentimes, all you really want is that 3-4 teaspoons or tablespoons to get that, you know, quench your sweet tooth.
So there's been some questions in the chat about how do you find a dietitian, and one of the places you can go is you can ask at a local hospital for a dietitian that may be very aware of diabetes recommendations and work with you on an individual plan. As Hope said, you know, everybody has a different way of approaching diabetes from a nutrition management part. And then the other thing is there is on the American Diabetes Association, the Food Hub, and it's great. It's got all sorts of recipes and things that you can integrate into your life to make it maybe some more fun. I love to look up something on the internet once a week and make something new. We've got a beautiful garden in our place. And so we just make something that's right now, something that's coming up that we're getting from the garden, but you can do that at the grocery store too. Try something new and see what kind of recipes you can find. And the Food Hub's a good place for that. So just to, yeah.
I would just add a couple things. One is if someone can maybe post the link to all the diabetes self-management education and support programs in the country, because I know that map exists. And the other thing is I would encourage people not to think of a visit to a dietitian or going through the diabetes self-management education classes as a one-time deal. It's not once and done. People really need that chronic, regular support to make those tweaks in eating habits and have those stick over time, where they become your new habits. That just doesn't happen overnight.
And Sarah just posted the link in the ADA to find diabetes education program, which almost always integrates a nutrition person within their system. So the link is in chat. So there is a dietitian that's put in a couple questions and very concerned about this concept of a higher carbohydrate diet, our food plan. And I think high carb is probably not, high carb would be like for a marathon runner at a really high level. Right. But, you know, 40% is really not considered a high carb diet. But anyway, a lot of concern about that. So is there a randomized control trial that shows that moderate carbohydrate intake or that people can reverse their diabetes? Yeah.
I mean, there's a body of literature around vegan eating plans, which really is the antithesis to very low carbohydrate. So there is that body of literature. I think that the point is that one of the one of the central reasons of why people can reverse, put into remission, slow the progression of disease is weight loss. And then with weight loss, keeping as many of those pounds off over time. I mean, we have seen that in study after study after study, whether you look at the Look Ahead study, or you look at the diabetes prevention program study, or you look at the most recent direct UK trial. I mean, all of that literature points to taking pounds off and keeping as many of those pounds off as you can.
And as from my exercise physiology background, I will also underline the role of physical activity in maintaining that weight loss. And it's a lot. It's not like 20 minutes a day. I mean, it really is 45 minutes to an hour. Most days of the week to maintain that weight loss. And we actually have had some sessions on people with chronic injuries, et cetera. And I think there you go to a physical therapist and find a program that works for you. Once again, it's important to individualize that, but the activity component can really help hold that weight at bay, because otherwise it's really hard to keep it off.
Right. There is no doubt about that, Carla. I mean, physical activity has, again, in studies been shown over and over to be the vehicle to not so much in weight loss or during weight loss, but it's like you're fighting chance against what we know is that slowing of metabolism. And I've done, I can't dig it up now, but I've done some writing over the last few years, both for colleagues as well as for consumers on what the research shows are successful ways to keep those lost pounds off.
Yeah. Ellen writes in more specific, I am seeking medication-free life where diabetes type 2 is managed through diet and exercise. My last A1C is 5.8. Congratulations. That's great. And we have begun reducing medications. With regard to diet, what should be my focus?
I mean, again, I hate to sound like a broken record or mantra, but need to find what is going to work for you long term. And it is not necessarily one answer for every person out there. If someone wants to try, eating 30% of their calories as carbohydrate, which is fairly low. I mean, let's sort of put out there that moderate intake Americans consume a moderate amount of carbohydrate. Somewhere it's been historically in the 45 to 50%. And, so on that 30% of carbohydrate, I would really make sure that you are getting some nutrient-packed fruits and vegetables and beans, legumes, and then using your lean sources of protein and your healthier fats. And, if someone wants to do that, fine. And then, okay, so maybe that's your starting place. And, then we need to factor in weight and we need to factor in lipids, et cetera. And, is that comfortable for you? And then is that helping you maintain glycemic management? I mean, I think what people need to understand, and I know I sound like I am promoting glucose lowering medication, but I am not. But I do know that type 2 diabetes is a progressive disease. We didn't always know that. I mean, it really wasn't until really the late 90s with the United Kingdom Diabetes Perspective Study that we saw that. And we also know today that, I mean, it's been fascinating, as I'm sure you'll agree, Carla, to see some of the additional benefits of medications like the SGLT2 inhibitors, Invokana and dapagliflozin. The sort of gliflozin category is the end part of those medications, that they also seem to be helping with reducing cardiovascular disease and with kidney disease. I mean, those are some significant benefits. So I just encourage people, you know, sometimes I think there's this, you know, I want to do it all without medications. But I think a more balanced and nuanced approach can be more helpful for a lot of people.
Another question coming in, which I'm surprised didn't show up earlier, is I would like more about the glycemic load of food and the SMART goal eating plan. Are there any good books out there on glycemic load to help better understand it, if you could recommend? And I think on glycemic index and load are different, so maybe clarifying that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just gonna, I mean, they're related. They talk about, you know, I mean, they really look at eating one food at a time and a certain amount of that food. I think it's 50 grams, if I'm correct, and how much that amount of that food raises glucose over a relatively short period of time. I will share with you, again, I'll go back to the ADA nutrition guidance, and the title being Nutrition Therapy Consensus Report 2019, if people want to look for it, and someone might want to put a link to that, is that there really isn't the literature out there. There really aren't the studies out there to really promote using GI or glycemic load to a great degree in making food choices, that you can probably accomplish a lot more by looking at sort of the whole picture of your food choices. However, I will say that the folks in Australia, for a variety of reasons, really put a lot of stake into glycemic index. So,
okay. The question, can you get fiber from low-calorie vegetables? And is it any different from other things like whole grains?
I mean, you definitely can get some fiber from I'm just going to call them non-starchy vegetables, because I think that is the phrase that we use. Sure, broccoli, asparagus, etc., contain some fiber. I want people to think of fiber in a little bit broader way. Like, I actually wish it was called dietary fibers because our foods contain thousands of different fibers. And I would say you're not going to get this wide breadth of dietary fibers if the only place you're getting carbohydrate from is non-starchy vegetables.
Good. Can you control type 2 diabetes with diet? I think we've talked about this, but just another question. And can you get off medication, or are you medication for the rest of your life?
You know, I mean, it really depends on your situation. It depends at what point in the progression of disease you learn you have type 2 diabetes. It depends how long you live. I mean, the rest of your life is very different for people. So, I mean, if you want me to go a little further there, I mean, that's a very, very big question. Again, I really, really want people to not look for global answers and to really, I mean, you are your N of one, I'd like to say. And what I mean by that is in studies, we look at the number of subjects and that's the N, but you are your N of one. I mean, you know your genetic makeup. You know the way that you like to eat. You know what you're willing to change. You know the amount of physical activity that you can do. You know your glucose management situation at present. I mean, I really encourage people to focus there. I will say that I think there's general consensus that the majority of people with type 2 diabetes will need one or more glucose lowering medication during the course of their diabetes management. And we say that once someone has had type 2 for somewhere in the 10 to 15 years, oftentimes people require insulin. I don't think sometimes people realize there are actually, in the United States anyways, more people with type 2 diabetes who take insulin than the entire type 1 population. And it's just because it's about a 95% to 5% numbers of people in those populations.
You know, one of the things I want to support Hope on is I've worked for many years, 35, 40 years, on the span of type 1 and type 2 diabetes, now more in pediatrics. But I think what's important is it's really great when people want to address their glucose with healthy eating and exercise and doing all the right, whether it's a low carb or a moderate carb diet. But I think it's important to get in your mindset that that may not work forever. No matter if you go to a no carb diet, it may not work forever. And so don't be fearful. If you have done your homework and you have done what you can do to manage this in a lifestyle perspective, if that doesn't continue to work, don't ignore blood glucose numbers that are starting to elevate and pat yourself on the back. Maybe you put medication off for 10 years. Good. You didn't want it. But at some point, it may be that it's time to embrace it. And it's just the way diabetes works. And
yeah. And I mean, what we know, Carla, I think you and I can agree from the literature, is that what will keep people healthy is that keeping those glucose levels under good management within what we say time and range, 70 to 180, as you know, at least 70% of the time, ideally, maintaining those lipid levels where we want them to be. And very importantly, maintaining control of blood pressure. I mean, I think, you know, there's some reasonably good data around those lipids and blood pressure become even more important in prevention delay of the cardiac diseases, the heart diseases that we see in people with type 2. And that really is the killer.
So this is a good question as well. So is it more effective? I don't know if more effective is the right term, but is it effective perhaps to check your glucose with your glucose monitor 2 hours after eating? And maybe mention what the goals are if we do that.
Sure. Yeah, I think so often people don't even know what the bullseye is that they're shooting for. So pre-meal, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, is somewhere about 80 to 130 is the goal of fasting and before meals. And then under 180 about 1.5 to 2 hours after you start to eat. Okay. And I think sometimes, I mean, those numbers are set by looking at the literature, looking at the evidence over time of what we know keeps people healthy. And by healthy in this instance, I mean keeping from developing the complications of diabetes. And I mean, I will add to this that where we seem to be sort of slowly making this transition today from A1C as sort of being the gold standard of glucose control over to something that is called time in range. And so the time in range goal, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Carla, but is achieving 70% of your numbers between 70 and 180. So that's all the ups and all the downs. And if you're taking a glucose lowering medication that has the capacity to cause low blood glucose, like a sulfonylurea or insulin, I mean, the good news is that most of the glucose lowering medications today do not cause hypoglycemia. I think that's been a big blessing. But minimizing that hypoglycemia, and then on the flip side, minimizing that, what we're now calling time above range.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, those are international standards that I'm speaking to.
And they really impact almost every age group. There are some exemptions to that, but they're few and far between, usually because of multiple comorbid conditions or being very, very young, like a child with type 1 diabetes who's under the age of 2, for example. So now there's an anonymous person that asks, how much protein do you recommend for each meal and each snack?
So again, I will come back to there is no one. It is really completely based on you, your eating habits. One thing that I think is so important and is challenging in this discussion is our calories only come from 3 nutrients: carbohydrate, protein, fat. And certainly if you drink alcohol, you can pick up some calories from alcohol. But our food, all the food that we eat, they are packages of different amounts of those 3, as they're called, macronutrients, or the big nutrients. So if you want to eat a lower amount of carbohydrate, just by the nature of the foods that contain carbohydrate, protein, and fat, you will, by reflex, eat more protein. And the foods that contain protein, not always, but often come sort of packaged with some fat. So like if you're looking at like red meat, or you're looking at cheese, I mean, those foods come packaged with fat, which is why your poultry and your fish are some better choices to both eat less saturated fat as well as eat less fat in total. Is that making sense? Does that help answer that question? I mean, there is no one right amount of any nutrient that's right for every single person with diabetes. And if you're going to eat more carbohydrate, like as people who are vegan or certain types of vegetarians do, you're going to, by reflex, typically eat less protein and eat less fat. And the converse is true as well.
It's good. So also, there are 2 food plans that are out there that are talked a lot in the literature and have been shown consistently to be healthy across the board. So we talk about diabetes, we talk about heart disease, we talk about cancer, and that's the DASH diet and the Mediterranean food plan. So if you could just briefly address what those are for our audience and maybe how to find them.
Sure. So I just want to come back to one point first, which is sort of my favorite point of the 2019 ADA consensus report, or what I've been referring to as ADA's nutrition guidance. And there are in that publication 4 what I call common denominators. They didn't call them common denominators, but for the sake of teaching, that's what I like to call them. And I would like to go through those. So they are: 1, emphasize consumption of non-starchy vegetables; 2, minimize consumption of added sugars and refined grains; 3, choose whole foods over highly processed foods; and 4, replace sugar-sweetened beverages with water as often as possible. So the committee of experts, which were about 15, who developed this consensus report, reviewed about 9 different eating patterns or eating plans in this publication. Again, hopefully someone has posted that, and if people want to dig into the literature, they can read that. But these common denominators were really common among these eating plans that have been found to be healthful for people with diabetes, including some lower carbohydrate intakes. To get to your question about the Mediterranean diet, I mean, I think that makes me chuckle a little bit or smirk, because the true Mediterranean diet, you almost have to live in the Mediterranean to really eat that. And some of the literature that has contributed to our body of knowledge around Mediterranean diet comes from, I believe, Spain. But, you know, a couple things there. Oil is the main source of fat or oil that's used, fewer than 4 eggs a week, a low amount of red meat, and low to moderate amounts of wine, and not specified red wine, any kind of wine. The quote unquote DASH, DASH, stands for dietary approaches to stop hypertension. That was a big multi-year, multi-dollar NIH study, actually in hypertension, not in diabetes. But that has sort of led to a lot of different books, etc., and was written about in these guidelines. And it again promotes the foods I've mentioned as healthy sources of carbohydrate, the principles in the common denominator. It emphasizes fruits and vegetables, low-fat dairy foods, whole grain, poultry, fish, etc.
Great. So I hate to say this, but our time has come to an end, and we still have quite a few questions in the queue. Sorry, we didn't get to answer those questions. So this wraps up our last question for the session. A few items before we close today, kind of the synopsis of our day is most Americans do not eat sufficient servings of fruits and vegetables, yet these foods are, whether fresh, frozen, or canned without added sugar, contribute a lot of nutrition. Assess the numbers of servings of fruit and vegetables you typically eat each day. And one of the things I tell, especially my young teenage patients who are not always willing to eat fruits and vegetables, a fruit or a vegetable with every meal. And if you choose a low carb diet and you want to eat vegetables, that's fine. I actually had zucchini and tomatoes with my breakfast this morning as a low carb
Tomatoes
option.
are fruit.
Yeah, sort of. And when choosing fruit and vegetables, whether fresh, frozen, or canned, make sure they don't contain a lot of added sugars, sodium, or fat. Purchase them in unadulterated forms. Examples are, unsweetened applesauce, apples versus apple pie. But remember, you can have a small piece of apple pie. And one of the ways to see if you've had too much is to check your blood sugar, as someone asked, 2 hours after you eat, and try and keep it under 180. Thriving with diabetes takes a village, and we are here to support you. Special thanks to our expert, Hope Warshaw. Loved having you, Hope. And our sponsor for this event, Walmart. I'm Carla Cox, and on behalf of the ADA team, we want to thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to connecting with you at our next Ask the Experts event, September 14, Health Insurance Planning. Register for an upcoming event. Go to the diabetes.org/experts. We were sorry we were unable to get to all your questions. If you have questions about this event, you are welcome to contact us at askada@diabetes.org or calling 1-800-342-2383. We'd love to get your feedback on this event. Remember to look for our short survey in your email box. Your feedback is very important to us and will help to inform future planning. Please join us at our next event. Invite your friends, and thank you so much for coming, and stay well.